Hey, I'm here today to share with you a bunch of books I've picked up in the last maybe like 2 to 3 months now at this point. So there's an absolute ton of them, and this is definitely more than my usual occasional book shopping. And that's because I've been traveling a bit recently, and every time I go somewhere I want to, go to the bookstores that I'm not around regularly and things. So these books are from Bookshop Santa Cruz and Bad Animal Books, which are both in Santa Cruz, California, Northtown Books in Arcata, California, Dog-Eared Books in San Francisco, California, Main Street Books in Monroe, Washington, Book Mountain and Squamish Community Bookstore in Squamish, British Columbia, and the rest are from thrift books online and a library book sale near me. A lot of these books were also given to me and gifted to me for my birthday, which was recently, and that's always my favorite gift to receive is a book. So I really appreciate anyone who bought me any of these books or gave me a gift card to a favorite bookstore here. We will start with the fiction today. I have The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada. This is translated by David Boyd from the Japanese. Factory follows 3 workers at a sprawling industrial factory. Each worker focuses intently on the specific task they've been assigned. One shreds paper, one proofreads documents, and another studies the moss growing all over the expansive grounds. But their lives slowly become governed by their work. Days take on a strange logic and momentum, and little by little, the margins of reality seem to be dissolving. Where does the factory end and the rest of the world begin? What's going on with the strange animals here? And after a while, it could be weeks or years, the 3 workers struggle to answer the most basic question: what am I doing here? And I actually already finished this book, so you'll hear me talk about what I thought of it in my July wrap-up. The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginzburg, and it was translated by Francis Frenaye. The Dry Heart begins and ends with the matter-of-fact pronouncement, "I shot him between the eyes." As the tale, a plunge into the chilly waters of loneliness, desperation, and bitterness, proceeds, the narrator's murder of her flighty husband takes on a certain logical inevitability. Stripped of any preciousness or sentimentality, Natalia Ginzburg's writing here is white-hot, tempered by rage. She transforms the unhappy tale of an ordinary dull marriage into a rich psychological thriller that seems to beg the question, why don't more wives kill their husbands? The Birthday Party by Laurent Mauvignier, translated from the French by Daniel Levin Becker. Buried deep in rural France, little remains of the isolated hamlet of the 3 lone girls, save a few houses and a curiously assembled quartet. Patrice Bergignon, inheritor of his family's farm, his wife Marion, their daughter, Ida, and their neighbor, Christine, an artist. While Patrice plans a surprise for his wife's 40th birthday, inexplicable events start to disrupt the hamlet's quiet existence. Anonymous, menacing letters, an unfamiliar car rolling up the driveway. And as night falls, strangers stalk the houses, unleashing a nightmarish chain of events. Sounds spooky. Reservoir Bitches by Dahlia de la Cerda. This is translated from the Spanish by Heather Cleary and Julia Sanches. This is a short story collection. Life's a bitch. That's why you gotta rattle her cage, even if she's foaming at the mouth. In the 13 linked stories of Reservoir Bitches, Mexican women prod the bitch that is life and become her. From the all-powerful daughter of a cartel boss to a victim of transfemicide, from a household of spinster seamstresses to a socialite who supports her politician husband by faking indigenous roots. These women spit on their own reduction and invent new ways to endure, telling their own stories in bold, unapologetic voices. And this was put on my radar because it was nominated and longlisted for the International Booker Prize of 2025. I picked this one because of the cover, which I thought was amazing. This is Cheri and the Last of Cheri by Colette. This book was translated by Roger Senhouse. Colette's chronicle of the rise and fall of Cheri, who was brought up in the fabulous demi-monde of the wealthy Parisian courtesans before the First World War and after it died by his own hand in a dingy lodging. In her portrait of the spoilt, capricious youth, as handsome as the devil, and of the talented woman who devotes 6 years to his amorous education, Colette achieved a peak in her earthly, sensuous, and utterly individual art. Indeed, these two novels, as Raymond Mortimer has written, form the classic analysis of a love affair between a very young man and a middle-aged woman. Miguel Street by V.S. Naipaul. Laura Bogart, the bigamist. Popo, the carpenter, who wasn't. B. Wordsworth, the poet who was. Morgan, the pyrotechnicist. And the Mad Man, and many others. This is Miguel Street, where all were poor, but none were starving, as seen through the eyes of a street rob, a young fatherless boy growing through and beyond his childhood home in the microcosm that was the port of Spain, Trinidad. Star 111 by Lutz, Seiler, translated from the German by Tess Lewis. Star 111, the name of a popular East German transistor radio, begins with the world turned upside down. It is the fall of 1989. The communist government of the GDR is losing its grip on power. Karl Bischoff, a very young man, trained as a bricklayer, now a college student, is abruptly recalled to the obscure small town where he grew up. His hard-working, unprotesting parents inform him that with the border open, they intend to leave the country and check into a West German refugee camp. Will Karl look after the house and take in the mail? They assure him that they'll be in touch before long. Thus deserted, Karl has no idea what to do, so he packs the family car and heads to Berlin, where he joins a group of squatters led by a goat herd. Karl participates in the anarchic life of this anarchist commune, and keeps his distance too. He has all sorts of things to learn about himself and others. He is hungry for sex and love, and sometimes simply hungry. He worries about his parents, and he wants to be a poet. Star 111 is a story about unforeseen ends and new beginnings, about different kinds of families, biological and improvised, and about one innocent, aspiring poet in pursuit of an experience at a moment in history when everything is about to change and nobody knows how. A tender, entrancing, and comic tale of youth and adventure, it is a book that looks back on the history of our time to ask the most fundamental of questions: what does it mean to lead a good life? My curiosity has gotten the best of me. There was an article, and apologies for not having the specifics of this article, but it essentially was an article that was critiquing lit bro books, which I don't really have a ton of thoughts on. I really like to listen to people talk about lit bro books. I don't think I particularly read many of them. I don't think there's anything wrong with what people, are calling lit bro books. I mean, all books can be valuable to their readers, and I don't think there's any shame in that. But yeah, I don't know. This book was mentioned in an article about lit bros, so I kind of wanted to read it for that reason, as silly as that may be. Middle Passage by Charles Johnson. The year is 1830. Rutherford Calhoun, freed slave, ardent womanizer, and self-confessed liar and thief, must flee New Orleans because of bad debts and an ill-starred romance. His poorly chosen means of escape is to stow away aboard the slave ship Republic, en route to pick up human cargo in Africa. The ship's captain lives on the borderline between genius and madness. The crew are seafaring scum, and the slaves eventually packed into the hold are members of an ancient tribe of magicians. Thus begins one of the most extraordinary voyages in literature, and one of the most revelatory illuminations of the Black American experience, opening our eyes, our minds, and our hearts. I think I will read Oxherding Tale by Charles Johnson first, but I did kind of want to, not only read his more well-known book, but see what other things he has written. Tar Baby by Toni Morrison. This doesn't have much of a description about the plot, and I honestly don't know anything about the plot. I know that I want to read everything Toni Morrison has ever written, but one of the blurbs on the back says, Tar Baby is the most magnificent novel ever from one of our most acclaimed authors of our day, Toni Morrison. Never before has she probed so deeply and sensitively into the relationships between blacks and whites, blacks and blacks, women and men. Don't know what Tar Baby is about. I'm sure that it will, deal with race, as all of Toni Morrison's books do, and she's just an all-time favorite author of mine. I think everyone should read Toni Morrison, at least one of her books, though it's hard to say if you could only pick one. which would it be? My personal favorite is Song of Solomon. She's an author who we will forever be learning from. Chinatown by Thuận. This is translated by Nguyen On Lee. This is a book I've never heard anything about before, but just so happened to pick it up at the bookstore, read the back of it, and it sounds fascinating. An abandoned package is discovered in the Paris metro. The subway workers suspect it is a terrorist bomb. A Vietnamese woman is sitting nearby, her son asleep on her shoulder. As she waits, she begins to reflect on her life, from her constrained childhood in communist Hanoi to a long period of study in Leningrad during the Gorbachev period, and finally to the Parisian suburbs where she now teaches English. Through everything runs her passion for Thuận, the father of her son. She hasn't seen him in 12 years, but his presence is deeply woven into all of her dreams and memories. In a breathless, vertiginous, wow, I've never heard of that word before. I don't know if I said that correctly. And deeply moving monologue between the subway tracks, the narrator attempts once and for all to face and exercise the passion that haunts her. The posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas by Machado de Assis. This is translated by Flora Thomson-deveaux. The mixed-race grandson of ex-slaves, Machado de Assis is not only Brazil's most celebrated writer, but also a writer of world stature, championed by the likes of Philip Roth, Susan Sontag, Allen Ginsberg, John Updike, and Salman Rushdie. In his masterpiece, the 1881 novel, The Posthumous Memoirs of Bras Cubas, the ghost of a decadent and disagreeable aristocrat decides to write his memoir. He dedicates it to the worms gnawing at his corpse, and in 160 brief chapters tells of his failed romances and half-hearted political ambitions, serves up harebrained philosophies, and complains with gusto from the depths of his grave. Wildly imaginative, wickedly witty, and ahead of its time, the novel has been compared to the work of everyone from Cervantes to Sterne to Joyce. Any Man by Amber Tamblyn. A violent serial rapist who goes by the name Maud is on the loose. She hunts for men at bars and online. The place doesn't matter, neither does the man. Her victims then must grapple with the aftermath of their assault. Doubts from the police, feelings of shame and alienation from their friends and family, and the haunting of a horrible woman who becomes the phantom on which society projects its greatest fears, fascinations, and even misogyny. All the while, the police are without leads, the media hounds the victims, publicly dissecting the details of their attack. As the years pass, these men learn to heal by banding together and finding a space to raise their voices. This is Every Man Dies Alone by Hans Fallada, translated by Michael Hoffman. Based on a true story, this sweeping saga tells the tale of a working-class couple in Berlin who decide to take a stand against the Nazis. More than an edge-of-your-seat thriller, more than a moving romance, even more than literature of the highest order, it's a deeply moving story of two people who stand up for what's right and for each other. Hans Fallada wrote Every Man Dies Alone in a feverish 24 days soon after the end of World War II and his release from a Nazi insane asylum. He did not live to see its publication. I have two books by Alan Paton, who I read Cry the Beloved Country from, which I really enjoyed. Alan Paton was another author I didn't know really anything about, other than hearing something about Cry the Beloved Country, giving it a try, and finding it amazing. So I have Too Late, the Phalarope, which, again, never heard that word before. I'll have to figure out what that means. Here's Alan Paton's hauntingly beautiful story of what happens in a conventional South African town when one of its most respected citizens succumbs to his desire for a woman who is forbidden to him. We have Tales from a Troubled Land, which is a short story collection of Alan Paton's. This says, with a mixture of compassion and despair, this collection of 10 short stories speaks eloquently yet incisively of the injustices of the author's native land of South Africa. Loved and Missed by Susie Boyd. Ruth is a woman who believes in and despairs of the curative power of love. Her daughter, Eleanor, who is addicted to drugs, has just had a baby, Lily. Ruth adjusts herself in ways large and small to give to Eleanor what she thinks she may need: nourishment, distance, affection, but all of her gifts fall short. After someone dies of an overdose in Eleanor's apartment, Ruth hands her daughter an envelope of cash and takes Lily home with her. And Lily, as she grows, proves a compensation for all of Ruth's past defeats and disappointments. Love without fear is a new feeling for her, almost unrecognizable. Will it last? I love this kind of a cover. And yeah, New York Review of Books, all the styles of their covers I think are gorgeous. They have my favorite cover and book design, certainly, of any publisher. Black Water by Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce Carol Oates always makes me think of Eric Carl Anderson here on YouTube, who I know is a super fan of her work. And I don't really know where to start. Being completely honest, none of her books have sounded particularly interesting to me until I heard of Black Water. Kelly Keleller is an idealistic 26-year-old good girl when she meets the senator at a 4th of July party. In a brilliantly woven narrative, we enter her past and her present, her mind and her body, as she is fatally attracted to this older man, this hero, this soon-to-be lover. Kelly becomes the very embodiment of this vulnerable, romantic dreams of bright and brave women, drawn to the power that certain men command, at a party that takes on the quality of a surreal nightmare, in a tragic car ride that we hope against hope will not end as we know it must end. Story of the Eye, Georges Bataille. In 1928, Georges Bataille published under a pseudonym this first novel, a legendary shocker that uncovers the dark side of the erotic by means of forbidden, obsessive fantasies of excess and sexual extremes. A classic of pornographic literature, Story of the Eye finds parallels in Sade and Nietzsche, and in the investigations of contemporary psychology. It also forecasts Bataille's own theories of ecstasy, death, and transgression, which he developed in later work. I know this book is super gross out, and I'm not expecting to enjoy this read, but I do think it does sound so fascinating, particularly for its place in history as a shocking piece of literature. Frog by Mo Yan, translated by Howard Goldblatt. Mo Yan wrote one of my favorite books that I read last year, being Red Sorghum, and since then I've been thinking of picking up another one of his books. Frog opens with a playwright nicknamed Tadpole, who plans to write about his aunt. In her youth, Gugu, this beautiful daughter of a famous doctor and staunch communist, is revered for her skill as a midwife. But when the lover defects, Gugu's own loyalty to the party is questioned. She decides to prove her allegiance by strictly enforcing the one-child policy, keeping tabs on the number of children in her village, and performing abortions on women as many as 8 months pregnant. In sharply personal prose, Mo Yan depicts a world of desperate families, illegal surrogates, forced abortions, and the guilt of those who must enforce the policy. At once illuminating and devastating, it shines a light into the heart of communist China. Nonfiction by Julie Meyerson, and this is a fiction book, though it is titled Nonfiction. Two parents stand by powerlessly as their only child seems intent on destroying herself. As the mother, a novelist, attempts to understand her daughter, she finds herself revisiting her own uneasy, unresolved relationship with her mother. Weaving between childhood's past and present, laced with temptation and betrayal, Nonfiction is an unflinching account of a mother, daughter, wife, and author reckoning with the world around her. But can a writer ever be trusted with the truth of her own story? I think this is going to ask some very interesting questions here about authors and writing, which is a topic that I love as a reader. I have a play here, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is one of the most enduring and beloved plays of contemporary theater, firmly established in the dramatic canon. Acclaimed as a modern masterpiece, it is a fabulously inventive tale of Hamlet, as told from the worm's eye view of the bewildered Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two minor characters in Shakespeare's play. I'm very fond of Hamlet, and I think that this will just add to my enjoyment of that whole storyline as well. Yan Lanqi, The Explosion Chronicles. This is another Chinese author I read last year for the first time. I didn't love the book that I read, though it was quite interesting. It was Lenin's Kisses, which I read last year. This one, I don't know anything about. It is translated by Carlos Rojas. The Explosion Chronicles tells the unforgettable tale of rival families competing in a greed-fueled race to convert their sleepy rural community from the small town into a thriving super metropolis. With the Yi River on one side and the Balu Mountains on the other, the remote village of Explosion was founded more than a millennium ago by refugees fleeing a seismic volcanic eruption. But in the post-Mao era, that name takes on a surprising significance as the villagers aspire to transform their poor province into the bustling city of millions. This is really interesting because that plot line actually mirrors what the plot in Lenin's Kisses was, the other book I read by this author. So I'm wondering how similar these books will be in theme. Lenin's Kisses was actually pretty satirical, which was the strongest parts of that novel, I thought. So I would be happy to find out that this also is kind of a satire. We'll see what we find there. Whale by Cheon Myung-kwon. This is translated from the Korean by Shi Young Kim. This is another book that I heard about because of the International Booker Prize, though I think this was a few years ago that this was nominated for that. We meet Shen Hui as she returns to the scene of a crime she may or may not have committed. She drinks from a spigot, clobbers the head of a large snake, and eats it raw, slowly, stopping only to spit out the cartilage. In its belly was a frog. She eats that too. Xian's story widens to embrace a motley assortment of characters, many of them motivated by lust or vengeance, many cobbling together cash from their jobs as dock workers, fishmongers, bricklayers, or geishas. Xian's cinematic gift brands the brain. A penniless runaway sits thigh to thigh with a vicious gangster as John Wayne seduces her from the silver screen. A glittering whale twists in the air before being carved into pieces. A beloved elephant is resurrected as a stuffed mascot posted in front of a popular cafe. The living collide with the dead. To me, that sounds quite magical realism. And again, this is another publisher who I just love the way they make their books. This is Archipelago Books, the publisher of this. And again, I love this kind of offbeat size. It's very square and just has such a nice texture to the cover. And I also love books where the cover has their inside flaps as a part of it. And then the last thing I have for fiction are two screenplays by Jordan Peele. We have Get Out and Us. And I have watched the movie Us, though I have not watched Get Out yet. I did enjoy Us. I'm not much of a movie watcher, but I did like this film, especially liked that it was set in a place that I'm so familiar with. And this will be a fun experience. I don't think I've ever read a screenplay before. It's kind of a multimedia experience because you have a bunch of photos in here from the movie and, you know, it's all dialogue as well. So it will be an interesting experience to read these. I think I'll save Get Out until I've watched the movie first. I think that is the way that I want to approach these screenplays. So, okay, and now on to the nonfiction that I have. I'll start with Enemy Feminisms, TERFs, Policewomen, and Girl Bosses Against Liberation by Sophie Lewis. I am currently reading this book. I'm about that far. I'm taking it very slow. This is quite dense. This is my second Sophie Lewis book that I'm reading. I think she is a wonderful modern writer of nonfiction on feminism specifically. Enemy Feminisms is an unflinching tour of 200 years of enemy feminisms, from 19th century imperialist feminists and cops to 20th century KKK feminists and pornophobes to today's anti-abortion and TERF feminists. With verve and eloquence, writer and critic Sophie Lewis argues that we must reckon with what Western feminism has wrought if we have any hope of winning the bold, liberatory feminist politics that we need. These next two books, I'm actually going to do a video on when I read both of them. I have American Bulk, Essays on Excess by Emily Mester. What if we explored our relationship to consumption with the same depth and feeling that we use to tell our stories of great loves and losses? Americans are caught up in bulk. We guiltily watch Amazon boxes pile up on the porch, wade through endless reviews to find the perfect product, and crave the comforting indulgence of a chain restaurant. In American Bulk, Emily Mester intertwines cultural critique and personal history to explore how the things we buy, eat, amass, and discard become an intimate part of our lives. And then the second book that kind of goes hand in hand with this theme is All Things Are Too Small by Becca Rothfeld. This is Essays in Praise of Excess. So I think these two comboed together, especially because they're both such new publications, will make for a really interesting discussion. In her debut essay collection, critic Becca Rothfeld confronts one of the most sacred dogmas of our time, the demand that we apply the virtues of equality and democracy to culture and aesthetics. The result is a culture that is flattened and sanitized, purged of ugliness, excess, and provocation. Our embrace of minimalism has left us spiritually impoverished. We see it in our homes, where we bring in Marie Kondo to rid them of their idiosyncrasies and darkness. We take up mindfulness to do the same thing to our heads, emptying them of their musings, thoughts, and obsessions that make us who we are. In the bedroom, a new wave of Puritanism has drained sex of its unpredictability, and thus of its true eroticism. We have flipped our values, Rothfeld argues. While the gap between rich and poor yawns hideously wide, we strive to compensate with egalitarianism in art, erotics, and taste, where it quashes wild experimentation and exuberance. Onto an older piece of nonfiction that has been mentioned a lot in other things that I've read. We have Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman by Michelle Wallace. Originally published in 1978, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman caused a storm of controversy. Michelle Wallace blasted the masculine biases of the black politics that emerged from the 60s. She described how women remained marginalized by the patriarchal culture of Black power, demonstrating the ways in which a genuine female subjectivity was blocked by the traditional myths of Black womanhood. With a foreword that examines the debate the book has sparked between intellectuals and political leaders, as well as what has, and crucially, has not changed over the last 4 decades, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman continues to be deeply relevant to current feminist debates and Black theory today. I think if you're interested in this topic of women within the Black Power movement, you absolutely need to be reading from Angela Davis and Elaine Brown, who wrote A Taste of Power, was heavily involved with the Black Panther Party, and one of the only women who had, I guess, what you would call power as being a leader within the Black Panther Party. I'd highly recommend A Taste of Power by Elaine Brown if you're interested in more things on this topic. It's What I Do, A Photographer's Life of Love and War by Lindsay Addario. This is a book by a journalist. This was gifted to me by a dear friend who is going to go to grad school for journalism. Journalism is what I got my bachelor's of arts in, and I do really find a lot of value in reading from journalists. I've loved a lot of books by journalists, and this is a memoir of this journalist's account. A young photojournalist just finding her way, Lindsay Addario is sent to Afghanistan after the attacks of September 11th. As she documents the complex lives of the Afghan people, both under Taliban rule and after the U.S. invasion, Addario finds her calling as a war photographer, a calling that will lead her into virtually every major threat of war of the 21st century. She photographs the civilian casualties and misunderstood insurgents of the Iraq War, as well as the burned villages and countless dead in Darfur. She exposes a culture of violence against women in the Congo and gets kidnapped by pro-Gaddafi forces in the Libyan civil war. This relentless pursuit of truth shapes Addario's life. As a woman photojournalist, she fights her way into a boys' club of a profession. Rather than choose between her personal life and career, Addario learns to strike a necessary balance. In the man who will become her husband, she finds at last a real love to complement her work, not to take away from it. And as a new mother, she gains an all the more intensely personal understanding of the fragility of life. Huey, Spirit of the Panther by David Hilliard. This I heard about because David Hilliard was involved in the Black Panther Party, and this is his biography of Huey Newton. An authorized, definitive, and long overdue biography of revolutionary political leader Huey P. Newton, co-founder and leader of the Black Panthers for more than 2 decades, including never-before-released photos, interviews, and inside information. I think this will add a lot to my understanding of who Huey Newton was, as most of the works that I have read have been autobiographical. So while this is written by someone who, was a close friend and a confidant, I think that there are things that you'll probably see in here that maybe Huey Newton wasn't as revealing in his own autobiographical accounts. I do think it's always good when you're consuming autobiographical things, whether it be, a memoir or an autobiography, to also maybe complement that information with someone else's perspective on this person. While this, of course, is not an unbiased opinion, it is someone other than Huey P. Newton. I think that will add to my understanding of him and his importance. Bandit, A Daughter's Memoir by Molly Brodak. This I wanted to read after reading Molly, which was a memoir written by Molly Brodak's husband. It was written after Molly committed suicide. It talked about her, talked about their relationship, and really just left me feeling very unsettled and weird about reading that account of her life without, again, talking about the balance here, reading something from her own words. Now, her book Bandit was quoted a lot within his account of her life, so I did want to get to this book after reading that. In the summer of 1994, when Molly Brodak was 13 years old, her father robbed 11 banks, until the police finally caught up with him while he was sitting at a bar drinking beer, a bag of stolen money plainly visible in the back seat of his parked car. Dubbed the Mario Bros Bandit by the FBI, he served 7 years in prison and was released only to rob another bank several years later and end up back behind bars. In her powerful, provocative debut memoir, Bandit, Molly Brodak recounts her childhood and looks frankly at her complicated relationship with her father, a man she only half knew. At some angles, he was a normal father. There was a job at the GM factory, a house with a yard, birthday treats for Molly and her sister, but there were darker glimmers too. Another wife he never mentioned to her mother, late-night rages directed at the TV, the red Corvette that suddenly appeared in the driveway, a gift for her sister. Growing up with this larger-than-life, mercurial man, Brodak learned to get small and stay out of the way. In Bandit, she unearths and reckons with her childhood memories and the fracturing impact her father had on their family, and in the process attempts to make peace with the parts of herself that she inherited from this bewildering and beguiling man. This was quoted extensively within, I'm forgetting his last name, but Blake, the man she was married to when she was alive. It was quoted extensively in his book, and her writing was very beautiful from the excerpts that were included, so I'm looking forward to reading this memoir of hers. Illness as Metaphor and AIDS and Its Metaphors by Susan Sontag. In 1978, Susan Sontag wrote Illness as Metaphor, a classic work described by Newsweek as one of the most liberating books of its time. A cancer patient herself when she was writing the book, Sontag shows how the metaphors and myths surrounding certain illnesses, particularly cancer, add greatly to the suffering of patients and often inhibit them from seeking proper treatment. By demystifying the fantasies surrounding cancer, Sontag shows cancer for what it is, just a disease. Cancer, she argues, is not a curse, not a punishment, and certainly not an embarrassment, and it is highly curable if good treatment is followed. Almost a decade later, with the outbreak of a new stigmatized disease, replete with mystifications and punitive metaphors, Sontag wrote a sequel to Illness as Metaphor, extending the argument of the earlier book to the AIDS pandemic. So these are two essays published together on a topic that I had no idea that Susan Sontag had written about. I think this will be a revealing connection that she made at this time of, just how intense people's stigma was towards people who had AIDS. It was something that I had no idea that I would come across in the bookstore. Prisons, Protest, and Politics. This is an anthology edited by Burton M. Atkins and Henry R. Glick. This was something that I picked up. It's quite old. I think it's from the 60s. And I picked it up because I'm particularly interested in reading the essays in here by Eldridge Cleaver, Bobby Seale, and there might be something by Huey P. Newton as well. I don't know if I'll read everything that is included in this book, but yeah, wanted to pick it up for that reason of wanting to read those essays by people who were involved with the Black Panther Party. Traveling in the Land of My Ancestors, Books and Islands in Ojibwe Country by Louise Erdrich. Louise Erdrich is an author who I'd really like to read some of her fiction, but I couldn't pass up seeing this nonfiction of hers at the library book sale. For 2 decades, Louise Erdrich has been creating a spellbinding fictional portrait of Native American life. Now the gifted author brings us to a lovely and meditative account of a recent trip she took through the lakes and islands of southern Ontario with her new baby and the baby's father, an Ojibwe spiritual leader and guide. The stunning natural splendors of this world, where her Ojibwe ancestors have lived for centuries, are just the backdrop to what Erdrich summons to life, the long elemental tradition of storytelling that is in her blood. The New Left Reader, this is an anthology edited by Carl Oglesby. And this is another little nonfiction book that's older that I picked up for a specific reason of wanting to read the essays in here that are under a specific section titled The Revolutionary Frontier. There's an essay by Frantz Fanon, Fidel Castro, Malcolm X, and Huey Newton. Again, something where I'm not sure if I will be reading this entire book, but has some essays that I definitely want to get to. Adieu, A Farewell to Sartre by Simone de Beauvoir. This is a book that details the end of Sartre's life. A lot of this is dialogue, it seems. There's a very large section called Conversations with Jean-Paul Sartre. I think that this will be quite illuminating to read for, my knowledge of both authors and their relationship with one another and their works. So excited to get to this at some point. It's huge. Can't believe how much is in here, but I think it covers the last 10 years of Sartre's life. So that's quite a long time to be talking about in this much detail. So no wonder it's long. I'm sure they have a lot to say. These 2 books go together. We have A Daughter of Isis, The Early Life of Nawal el-Saadawi, and then we have Walking Through Fire, The Later Years of Nawal el-Saadawi. So these 2 in combination make up her autobiography. This is an author that I've read from before. I've really enjoyed her work, and she's someone who I think is such an interesting person and has had such an interesting life and perspective. It's just an author that I want to learn more about her personal life, as I know it has so greatly affected the way that she has written and the themes that she pursues in her fictional novels. So these 2 books make up her autobiography. I believe both of these were translated. This first one, A Daughter of Isis, was translated by Sharif Hatata. And Walking Through Fire, her later years, was also translated by Sharif Hatata. Silence Would Be Treason, The Last Writings of Ken Saro-Wiwa. This was something that I heard about in, I believe, one or multiple of Naomi Klein's books, but Ken Saro-Wiwa was an activist against the exploitation of oil and other resources in Africa. And these are his last writings. I believe we have letters in here. He was imprisoned, so I believe we might have some prison writings as well. Just someone that I don't know much about, who I would love to read more about, especially from his own words. The Tale of the Panther and the Dove. This is by Assata Shakur and Layla Khalid. This is just a compilation of speeches and essays from both of them. This book contains quotations and writings from the legendary organizers and iconic women, Layla Khalid of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and Assata Shakur of the Black Liberation Army. The writer on her work. Another anthology. This is edited with an introduction by Janet Sternberg, and I did read an essay from this in my video on reading essays. I already read the one by Toni Cade Bambara. There's a lot of other women in here who I'm interested in reading from. I'm particularly excited about getting to Joan Didion, Margaret Walker, Alice Walker, Erica Zhang. These are all people that I'm excited to read more from if I haven't already yet. And these are essays from women authors on writing, which is a topic I love to read. Then my final book here is The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Canadian Slavery and the Burning of Old Montreal by Afua Cooper. This I've had on my want to read list for a very long time. It is a historical account of Marie Joseph Angelique, a slave woman accused of starting the fire was tried in court and condemned to death. Only under the pressure of la question extraordinaire, a hideous torture that shattered the bones in her legs, did she confess to arson. Executed by hanging, Angelique entered Canada's history books as a criminal, but her trial offered the unique chance to tell her life story, one that would otherwise have gone unrecorded and unheard. Those are all the books I have. There's an absolute ton. Let me know if you've already read any of these, what you thought, what you are most interested in, if you've heard of any of these books before, if there's something new here that you're now eager to get to, let me know. And I'll end our video here for today. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.